All right, sweet.
So you should be good.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, cool. Let's. I was gonna say let's. I mean, maybe just let's just start with like a who are you? Who am I? What do each of us do? Why do either one of us care about housing? What's going on?
Yeah, sounds good.
um, so Stacy Dahl email introduced us.
Yeah.
I work with Stacy up at North Country Council. Yada yada yada. These parts you know.
Mhm.
But Stacy, I think put you in touch with me because it seemed like you had some interest in housing and like the
Yeah.
housing scene that's going on now and what it's all about. And it just so happens that I'm working on like a housing study over the next like who knows with COVID things are like the timetables on
Yeah.
everything are a little strange, but like
Times
through the
change.
spring, let's say through the
Cool.
spring. And so yeah, so I guess I'll tell you like, let me tell you a couple like key points on like my housing study, and then I'll tell you a little bit about who I am too. So I'm not just like
Nice.
cog in the wheel of work. So the housing study I'm working on is basically it's being funded through New Hampshire Housing Finance Agency. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically document what's going on with housing supply and demand in Coos, Grafton, and Carroll counties. And so my sort of intention in the project is to do it a little differently than like housing needs assessments get done.
Mhm.
Planners write these things all the time everywhere, right? A housing needs assessment is like a pretty standard thing to do. It makes sense, right? Housing's a big part of community planning. But a lot of times the way they're done is really data point heavy. Like what's the average rent? What's the average income? How much vacancy is there? They're really usually statistically driven. And my sort of goal is to go a little further than the statistics and try and get people's like lived experiences a little more
Okay.
so that we're not just sort of telling data points in a vacuum. We're telling actually like the stories of the people who live here, work here, are trying to live here and work here,
Mhm.
and just who's actually here, right? Like what do all of those numbers mean for actual humans?
Right.
So that's like what I'm doing. I myself am in the middle of like housing chaos, which makes it sort of like a perfect project for me because I'm like interested in knowing as much of it about it as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So my other half and I moved back to we're from northern Vermont. We live over in the Burke area,
Mhm.
and we've moved back home in the middle of all of the COVID craziness, and have legitimately been unable to find something to like buy. And we're in our mid 30s, right? That's like us. We're looking for a house to buy.
Mhm.
We sold our house where we came from and lived like we shacked up with my mother-in-law with this understanding that like hey, we could stay with you. We'll stay with family for a month or so. And then like a month turned into 6 weeks, turned into 2 months, turned into sort of all of the chaos of housing right now.
Yeah.
And so we're like definitely in the throes of all of that myself. So I kind of feel like on top of hearing what's going on with everybody else, I sort of have my own piece that I'm kind of pretty aware of too with the whole thing. So that's kind of like me in a nutshell.
Cool. I actually am also interested in North Country Council just because I'm not sure what that is. I was wondering if you could kind of just go over that.
Yeah, totally. So, North Country Council is, well, it's two things, and both of them are sort of terms, and then I can talk about what they actually mean, like on the ground. So,
Mhm.
we're a regional planning commission, and we're also like a federally designated economic development district.
Okay.
And so, regional planning commissions, like the state of New Hampshire, is divided into 9 regions, and
Mhm.
each one of those regions has a planning commission who looks at like basically what are the needs that go across all of the different communities in transportation, in economic development, in housing, in like land use, you know, decisions about what gets built or not built where. And basically, so every one of these 9 regions in the state has a commission of planners and then a group of commissioners, right? Like 1 or 2 from every community in it who work towards like not just the planning issues in their town, but the ones that go beyond their town and like where it starts to impact sort of everybody. We're also like a big way that money kind of gets funneled, to be frank, from the state government in certain like areas into the different projects, like complete street projects, things like that. Like the decisions about which federal and state monies go where is something that we help facilitate with our commissioners. So basically we'd sit down with everybody and figure out if we're going to support complete street projects this year, who's got one, how far along is it? And then we sort of figure out where the like limited resources, because unfortunately there's never enough resources as there is need, where they go. And so that's kind of what we do in that regard. And then as an economic development district, we look at honestly ways to promote new job growth and better job sustainability in the region. I often will sort of tell people that that's the coolest part of my job, is getting to try and figure out how to keep more money in more people's pockets around the region through neat new ideas, new collaborations, new jobs, new anything, right? And how we sort of make sure people who work here have places to live, they have access to good services, they have access to food, they have access to childcare. You know, how do we basically support our economy?
Cool. And is that a government funded? Like, is it funded by the state government or the federal government, or?
Yep, it's funded through the federal government. So it's the Economic Development Administration.
Okay.
At the federal government has these economic development districts around the country, where they try and figure out how each different area best supports its own like economic health.
Cool. So I can kind of introduce myself.
Yeah, totally.
So I was like a year ago going to college, and then I dropped out and I moved kind of around a little bit, and was lucky enough to find like a collective housing situation down in Worcester that was, the rent was like $400 a month, and so that was really great. But I couldn't find a job down there, so I moved up here. And the reason I was able to do that is because my family has like a house up here, kind of like summer home that we've been renting out. And so since then I've been looking to like move out of that house, and kind of like hopefully move somewhere closer to town, and just kind of get some independence and like launching ability. But I kind of found that all of the places to rent were like around like $800 like a month, 700 at the least. And then what I noticed, so I kind of have been here for almost a year now.
Yeah.
And
where's here really quick?
Oh yeah, so I live in Bethlehem, on the like Bethlehem Littleton town line.
Okay.
So I spend a lot of time in Littleton, and I work in Bethlehem at Reckless.
Gotcha. Oh, cool. Gotcha.
So what I noticed in kind of the months that I've been here is that people that I know who have moved out of places, the rent in those places would increase about $100 a month after they left. So it seemed like in looking for a places that seemed more affordable became less so after those people, there was like turnover.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, in the summer, a bunch of people kind of moved back here who I like met, who moved, like who were either like in college or somewhere else, but moved back because of COVID, kind of looking for like a solid place to be, and haven't been able to find anywhere to rent.
Yeah.
Partially because, like, you know, you look on, whenever I look on like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, for places, it's not the most ideal way to find things, but it's like it's there's limited things that are posted, and then it's all, you know, $700 a month or more. Like it's going up to like kind of $950 for like 2-bedroom place.
Yeah.
And or it's like four-bedroom houses for seasonal rent. So that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who lived here, you know, 2 years ago for a while, and they said like it was always easy to get rent. Like $600 was at the kind of like high end of rent, and for this to kind of be what the norm is for the rent price is pretty new for them.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in um, like housing and community and stuff like that. I was going to school for theater, but I kind of realized that I was more interested in like community organizing and stuff like that. So I wanted to experiment and live and see what was really kind of like going on in communities. And that's partially why I really want to know more about housing and rent and like living, because I really care about how people are able to live, and I think that's really important. And I think for some people, like, career is really important, but for other people, what's really satisfying is having like being able to like set up your own life really well. And I'm kind of interested in how that is set up in communities.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. You know, it's right before we got on the phone or whatever the heck this is, Zoom, right? But like right before we started talking this morning, I was going through, the state just put out a new, every year they do like a rental markets assessment where they
Mhm.
basically like survey. I don't know if you've come across this thing yet, but I'll share it with you. But they do like, it's basically right, it's data points, right? So like
Yeah.
the thing to always know is like really a lot of, you know, from our side of the work, it ends up being you got to document the issue going on,
Mhm.
pound the pavement, let everybody you possibly can know what it is that's going on,
Mhm.
hear about it from all of their different points of view, right? Are if you're somebody who Airbnbs your property, what does that look like? Why do you do that instead of giving long-term rentals? If
Right.
you know, if you're somebody who's a realtor, who are you seeing looking for what? Do you even play in the rental market, or are you only doing home sales, right? Like
Mhm.
really getting the idea like of who needs what, right? If you're a young adult trying to figure out how to settle in a community, what are you looking for and what do you need, and like how does it not match? If you're a senior and you're trying to figure out what happens with the fact that your house has 3 stories and now you can't go upstairs, and why are you heating this 2,000 square foot home just for
Mhm.
yourself? What are you thinking about for your housing future, right? Like
Right.
what do we all need? Because you're right on one thing for sure, which is that like having a good home life is like essential. I almost would say to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like if
Totally.
your home scene isn't great, if you are like really feeling like it's transient, if it's not working for you, like for any reason, it's so hard to see yourself move forward in your career. It's
Yeah.
hard to figure it out because you have this huge question mark, right? Hanging out there in the world, which is like, I'd love to blank, but I don't know where I'm going to live, right? Like it's
Yeah.
food, water, shelter, right? It's one of those like main three we all really
Right. Well,
need.
exactly. And I think that's kind of what I'm finding with me and my partner and, my friends who aren't, don't have, a solid place right now, is that it's difficult to feel like you can kind of like go forward when you don't have that kind of like solid base and you're in between all the time.
Yeah, totally. And but this, the scary thing is that the things you like even just said to me about like what the rental prices are, how you're seeing them changing, right? From like people, leaving units and seeing that same unit now say, actually, we want this for it instead.
Yeah.
This study that just came out, I mean, like they just dropped it for 2020 of the rental markets, say exactly that everywhere. And it's scary, but it's basically says, and I'm like going to tell you a couple of interesting points because you're somebody who talks to a lot of people too. And like I said, pound the pavement, right? Spread the word.
Yeah.
They are showing from the last 5 years, and I'm like angling my pen in the direction, a 20 to 22% increase in the cost of a rental of a 2-bedroom unit. So you're like when you're saying that used to be available for $600 a handful of years ago, like that's not even just your experience or even the experience in Littleton, Bethlehem. That is the experience across all of New Hampshire right now.
Oh, yeah.
And it's wild, right? And Grafton County, right, which you guys are in there, is seeing that happen even at an even higher rate than other parts of the state. And it's partly because there's a challenge in northern New Hampshire with like new housing production too, right? There's in the southern part of the state, there are more units that get built, more new units that get built. And every time you get new units, the market gets a little more competitive, right? There's more supply to match up with this like much, much higher amount of demand. Yeah. And so like, even as the supply keeps creeping up in certain places in the southern part of the state, we're still overall seeing that 20% increase. But when you come up here and you get like north of the Notch and you get up in these areas where there's not as much housing production, there's not as many new units coming in, it's even tighter.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's, it's interesting you sort of mentioned that to me because even the numbers you're talking about, it's like I really probably an hour before we got on this call closed the report that was saying this is like what we're seeing here. And one piece was that they've seen a 5%, right, increase in rent prices from last year alone. So forget 20% over 5 years.
Yeah.
This year alone,
damn,
5% higher on your rent.
And how much does that look like in terms of like rent numbers? Like if you have a $600 rent a month, how much would a 5% increase be?
Yeah, so now you got me on math. Let's see. 5% of 600 is, I'm cheating, but we're going to cheat with the calculator. Let's figure this guy out. I'm like notoriously bad at math.
Same. Really why I ask. I can't convert that shit in my head,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right. So that for like a $600 thing, that would mean $30 a month every month is across the state what we've seen those units go up. And like I said, up in Grafton County, up in where we are, right up here, we've actually seen that be like higher. And I'll share that report with you because it's just interesting to know, right? It's interesting because it's interesting to take like what you experience, what you see other people experiencing, and be able to say, this isn't just us, right? Like this isn't just because like we happen to be in an area where there isn't a good amount of housing, or we happen to be in an area where things are a little nuts right now, or it's just because we happen to all work at the same place together. Like, it's not that. It is like universal. It is across the board. Wages don't line up with what you need to make to rent like a 2-bedroom unit. They just don't. Here's a good one for you. In Grafton County, so if you took like the average income of all of the renters in Grafton County, you said, okay, that pans out to the average one makes, and I'm going to ballpark here because I'm not looking at the numbers, but like somewhere between like $35,000 and $40,000 a year. That's your average renter. So like 50% below, 50% above. That guy right in the middle, or that household right in the middle, they're making, say, let's call it 40,000, somewhere between 35 and 40. In Grafton County, for it to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at the rents that are being seen across the state or across the county, right? It's county specific. You have to make 134% of the median income. So like, what the heck does that mean, first of all, right? But like, it means that to afford the average 2-bedroom unit, you have to make way more than the average renter does. You have to make 34% more than the average renter does, which is probably like another 10 grand a year.
Damn, that's a lot.
Yeah, right. 34% is a lot of money.
Oh my God.
But if you think about that, think about what that really means, right? Because what it really means is the average 2-bedroom unit. So right in the middle of there, you have to make so much more than the average income. Right there, it tells you there's a big gap, right? Like there's a whole bunch of people who would want these sort of units, but can't afford them. And then you add that with the fact that we don't have vacancy rates the way that like a healthy rental market does. There's standards, right? Like people like me, geeks like me, study this stuff like way more than I do even, for years, and they figure out what a healthy vacancy rate in a rental, like in a community, is for rentals. And the like consensus, and this is like a national standard, is 4 to 5% of the units should be vacant at any time. That's what keeps it a competitive market.
Okay.
And right, because as long as there's some vacancy, a decent percentage of vacancy, then the people who are looking for housing, those prices won't skyrocket up as much, right? Because some of the units just won't get rented, which means, say the landlord is like, I'm trying to rent it for this much, but it just won't rent. The prices get a little lower. There's some space for people to come and go. Turnover can happen. You know, you can rent a place and then decide you want to move to cheaper place or a nicer place and have those be options and free up the unit you lived in, right? Like, so 4 to 5%, that's like what you shoot for to have like a healthy rental market in an area. We are looking at more like a 1.5, 1.8% rental rates. So less than half of the vacancies we need to keep it healthy. So like what that actually means for humans, because no human cares about a statistic ever, I don't think, really in life. But like what that actually means for people, right? What that means for you, what it even means for like me, is that there aren't open units. So either the prices just keep going up because demand keeps going up and going up and going up, and the supply is still the same, right? People don't move out of those units,
right?
And there's not enough vacant ones. It means that it's harder and harder to get them, right? Even if you did have, frankly, even if you did have like a whole bag of cash to pull out, right? The units aren't even functionally available.
Right.
So it's like you couple those two things together and you say, the prices are going up really quick, real high, right? Let's go back 20% over 5 years, like big hard swallow on that. That's a gulping statistic to hear.
Yeah.
Then you put that with the fact that these vacancy rates are very, very low. And you realize that if you're seeking housing, it is a real tough thing to do right now.
Right.
Which means things get weird, right? People start, and sometimes out of the weirdness comes good creativity, right? And that's the benefit side, right? Like
Yeah.
you start to see things like more people figuring out how to team up together to live in that 4-bedroom house or do these things. And so like we all know, like out of challenge usually comes opportunity. But at the same point, we have big challenges and we have not figured out our way out of them yet, right?
Yeah.
And like you're living them, you're feeling that for sure. And you're not an exception in that. You are sort of like right in the mix of it, which doesn't make it any better.
Well, and it's definitely frustrating as a person my age. I'm 22, and you know, seeing the other people my age in the area having a kind of having it that ability to launch and become independent and seek independence being very limited is frustrating, especially when, you know, for a lot of people seeking that independence could create, you know, more opportunity and a better life or like more emotional stability or something like that.
Yeah, and you know, like, and from sort of that like big tent view of the world, the other thing that happens is like up north up here, we have a hard time keeping young people.
Right.
And when it's harder and harder for them to figure out how to put down those roots and like you're saying, be like part of that community, because the housing situation is so challenging, we as like a whole, right, the whole of every business, every town, every civic organization, every art walk that happens, is that young people are becoming more and more absent from them. And at the end of the day, that next generation is who moves everybody forward, right? And so it's like so important, right? It's important beyond any individual person, right? It's important that there's spaces for young people to come here and stay.
Yeah.
And not feel like they come and they can piece it together for 6 months. They can piece it together maybe for a year before they finally just get fed up and say like, this is just like not gonna work.
Right. Which is kind of the situation I'm kind of, you know, kind of getting into myself, where it's, you know, like to set something up, it might be easier somewhere else, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which is terrible too, right? Because like you said, did you say you're working at Reckless?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you're in this place that's like in the North Country is like touted as being like, yes, there are cool people doing great things for their community here, right? Like we are like trying to build that like next wave of good going on here. And like we should be able to, as like a whole, wrap our arms around you, right? Wrap our arms around those people and say like, let's figure it out. And so that's where I go back to like in my project is trying to have these conversations, make these stories, make these connections, because we have to figure out what to do. And what to do is a complicated question, right? It takes a lot of people playing a lot of different parts.
Right.
I want to ask you a couple of questions if I can.
Sure.
Like, okay. So, and if you don't want to answer anything, you don't have to. Like, don't let me pressure you into feeling like you have to say anything.
Totally.
But I would love to like get an idea on like what is the nature of the problem most for you, right? Is it that you know the like type of unit you want, but so like I mean, I guess I'm wondering things like, when you were giving me your like little intro chat, you were saying like, you know, there's these like, say there's a 4-bedroom house, say there's a this, say there's a, like, is it for you more that you know what you're looking for, but can't afford it? Know what you're looking for, but can't find it where you want it to be, right? Close to town, all of that kind of stuff. Is it that you feel like you don't know where to find rentals that exist? You know, like, do you have like in your experience an understanding of like how much is attributing how much to the problem for you? You know, is it that you find these things that are a mismatch in the type of housing? Is it just straight like bucks on the page? This like the math doesn't work? Or is it like everything I find is in Dalton? There are not rentals in Dalton, by the way, but I don't think, but it's somewhere I don't want it to be. Like, how is it shaken out? Like, what does it feel like for you when you're trying to find it, right? When you're on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, is it that you feel like you don't see them, or that what you see isn't affordable, or that it's just in like a total crazy spot?
It's kind of a mix of all of it, I guess. Like it's definitely hard to find what I'm looking for kind of line up locationally, in terms of price and location for sure. I think another big piece for me is that I kind of know how I would want to live, and to me, paying a certain amount of money, paying like $700 minimum for a place where I'm like living alone is not really worth it to me. Especially because I have a place that I can live, you know, rent free with my parents. So to kind of to pay to then live alone is not preferable. I think as someone who moved up here, I kind of spent time here in the summers growing up, but didn't like really know anybody, and was looking to kind of become a part of the community and meet people and establish, just a kind of community and a base for myself. I think partially what I'm looking for is those spaces to find community. So I think it's not everyone's preference to live collectively or with other people, but that is my preference. And so I definitely I would prefer to be able to kind of like rent out a 3 or 4 bedroom place with a couple of friends. And have a place where that can be. I think part of another issue is that the public space around here is really geared towards kind of tourism, and it's fairly expensive. Like places like Reckless or Schilling are not places that like I could go necessarily, every day, or like
Yeah, you can't find yourself there 3 days a week to like make community, because then you'd be eating ramen every other night.
Right. So it's like to find community is kind of difficult, and I think that if people have those spaces of their own where people can collect, with each other in spaces, which is difficult as well in this kind of time. But I think that is a way that I can see community here working. And as someone like moving into a place, having that be available as well through like having roommates or living with people or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Is like, if one thing was going to help you right now, what would it be? Like, would it be finding the spot? Would it be finding the 3 or 4 other people who like are like ready to go on it too? Like, would it be straight up just having like lower prices on the units? Like, if you know what I mean, like if you had to be like, what would really help?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is the spot and the price. There's a couple people that I've been talking to who are interested in collectively renting to kind of reduce price as well.
Totally.
So like, and because of the just wide number of people who are looking for housing, there's so many people that I've talked to that are like even more people that I could reach out to about collective renting. the hardest thing has been finding a place in this area.
Yeah.
So there's places more in like Lisbon and Whitefield. Um, and then I've seen like maybe a couple in St. J or something.
Yeah.
But here really there's only like seasonal rentals. And I think, it's not really my ideal to like, and other people I've talked to as well, to like move out to like St. J, and I've heard, pretty bad things about Whitefield and Lisbon and everything. So it's like, um, it's just, like I don't think moving just like a town over is kind of a like not ideal situation.
Yeah. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want to be part of the community you're starting to put down roots in, right? Not
Right,
one,
exactly.
not one three
And
towns
for the
away.
people that I know who've lived here, like to move to another town uproots their whole community as it is.
Yeah, and if you like value things like being able to like get to your spots, like your spots where your people gather,
Exactly.
like having it be easy. Like, I mean, I've lived a lot of places over the last, probably since I was your age, to be honest with you. And like I've moved, like my husband and I joke we've never lived anywhere for longer than 18 months. And we haven't, right? But like, and we're like 35. So like we've
Wow.
been at this, like we move all the time. And
Right.
sometimes it's just like spot to spot to spot in the same like community, right? But like sometimes it's all over the place. But like being able to like walk to things, ride your bike, like have a different way to like get somewhere instead of feeling like you got to pack up in the car and drive half an hour to get to work.
A total difference.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It's a different way of being, right? Like my offices are in Littleton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now I work from home almost entirely. This is my lovely seasonal rental you're seeing me in right now. Right. But like we finally broke down and got a seasonal rental because we needed elbow room. And like that for me, right? Offices in Littleton, I love the sense of community that I get from who I work with, right? Like you talk to Stacy, she's a good time. She is a great person.
Mm-hmm.
She is like pushing the envelope. She is sort of like everybody you want to spend your time with. And our whole staff has got like a pretty good feeling like that together. But even when I've been working for North Country Council and showing up in the office every day in Littleton, home for me is 2 towns north of St. J. Mm-hmm. And so it's a 45-minute ride. It makes me less likely to stay after work and hang out.
Yeah.
It makes me less likely to get up on the Saturday and go and like do like an art walk in Littleton. Exactly. Because it's just one more set of like inconvenience, right? So like I get that.
Well, and I think like a huge thing for, those community events that are available for the community is that part of people living so far away and kind of in like isolated spots is that I think it makes it a lot more difficult to come out to those events. Like the amount of work that it takes to just get people's awareness of community events, and then the amount of like, annoyance to kind of wrestle yourself from your comfortable home when it takes 15 or 30 minutes to drive out there. Like I think that is an inhibitor to community and these events and attendance. Like it's a lot easier to want to go to something if you can kind of see it right in front of you, and it's like you're going to that thing is kind of catching the flow of what you're already doing rather than like, stopping and starting and then stopping and starting again.
Totally, right? If you weave it into your life. I agree with you completely. Like I think that is how, I think you're kind of describing that really well, right? It's like, if you've got to go out of your day and replan it to show up at that thing, you're less likely to do it than if you're sitting in your house knowing it's happening 2 blocks away, being like, let's just go check it out. Right. Like you're like, well, we should go.
Yeah.
And go, right. And that's when you figure out the places that feel like the right that's where you find your like-minded spirits, right? That's where you find your community connection.
Right.
It's also where you bump into people who don't see eye to eye with you, but they get used to seeing you, and everybody starts to realize that like your community looks different than you think, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think the other thing is that what can happen, I think, is people become, especially if they don't have like a partner or a kind of domestic life set up, is that your whole community becomes your work. And
Yeah.
then you maybe like kind of are spending all your time with these people, you're hanging out with them outside of work, you're partying with them, or doing whatever. And then like what I worry about in those kind of situations is that when you don't have access to different spheres of people, you can very easily become stuck with people that might be, you know, if it's volatile or kind of a toxic situation, if you have nowhere to turn, like I think it's very natural for people to stay in kind of bad social situations rather than turning to isolation and loneliness, because that feels almost worse.
Yeah.
And I think it's healthy to have different people and different things to turn to and have options to create that like emotional health and stability.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, right. And if they're all in your place where your community is, you've got that, right? And
Right.
and when they're not there, because either we've ended up with such a like lack of different people here, right? People of different ages, people of different like ethnicities, people of different lived experiences, whatever they may be, right?
Right.
Like when we don't have that space for like newcomers, for different like different energy, different thoughts, it's like you find more and more that, like you're saying, your world gets smaller and smaller, right? And like
Right.
you're less likely to go out and feel like you find those people you connect with, because you're in your space. Exactly, right? Like you're in your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're doing your day to day. And if it takes a lot to go and do something outside of that like work home situation, then you're just not as likely to do it, right? I mean, that's just something we all know when we sit on our couch and are trying to figure out if we're going to like go somewhere or not for the day or whatever it is. It's can be hard to do. So what do we do, right? That's the thing. That is really the thing, because we can have these conversations like all the time, right? And like we can have them like around our own dinner tables, and you can have them like you and me, two people who are just getting to know each other on this situation, but like you can have them everywhere. You have them over and over again. But the crux of the matter is like, so what do we do differently, right?
Right.
Like how do we understand where our housing is and isn't? Understand the places that have like built community in a grid way and the places that haven't yet, right? Because like that is a thing that happens. I'm not going to do like a picking on North Country communities piece here. So I'm going to jump over into Vermont, where I feel comfortable picking on communities a little bit. But I say this because I used to be the town planner for Lyndonville, right? Lyndonville, one town north of St. Jay. When I was the town planner for Lyndonville, and this is going back like 7-8 years now, they were trying to figure out how mountain biking in East Burke, Vermont. I don't know if you are in a world that overlaps with that world at all, but it is like a powerhouse, right? Like this village of 1,000 people, because that's how many people like actually live here, has become a place where there are like on average like 20,000 visitors a year coming to mountain bike on this like set of trail network we've all built on each other's property with no legal rights to anything, just neighbors letting neighbors ride bicycles and build trails in their yards.
Wow.
And now it's become this like really big economic driver, right? It's called Kingdom Trails, and it's hugely changed East Burke in a lot of good ways, but like with all change comes good and bad. I believe that through and through. Right. So it brought a lot of really good new energy to the town. It really helped the place breathe life back into its village, right? Like it used to be struggling to keep the country store alive, and now we have people like opening bars in parking lots with like thatched roofs off of a barn, because it's like, because there are people here now, right? And there are people who want to hang out, they want to be part of this community, like you're saying, that's formed around this like interest, this shared thing, this shared sense of wanting to get outside, liking to bike, whatever it is, right? And Lyndonville, when they were the planner, was trying to figure out how do they tap into it, right? Because they were like, East Burke is sort of feeling a little overwhelmed by this, right? Like it's a little more than East Burke. Like it's, you know, it's a good problem, but it's a problem. There's some challenge points to it in Burke. Like you can't buy anything in Burke anymore. You just can't, unless you're coming from away and have a large amount of money to throw at your home.
Yeah.
But like Lyndonville is like, they're small towns, right? It's like Littleton and Bethlehem. They're not like totally separate places, but like, how do they start to like, what makes a place start to feel like it's got that critical mass, right? What makes it feel like it's becoming a place, right? Like when you go through and you say like, these are the places I find rentals, like what's not jiving there that isn't working, right? Because there's either like two ways you approach a problem like that. We either try and figure out, and probably it's not even either, it's more of a both. We figure out how to capitalize on like a sense of place, a sense of community, building a culture in places that aren't having it but have the housing. And then on the other hand, you figure out how to get more housing in the places that are already building it too, right? But like both of those things kind of need to happen for everything to feel better in places,
right?
Because we don't build a lot of new housing. And building public housing, building housing that's supported by grants is very cumbersome. And like nonprofits that do it, there are only a few of them in the state. And there particularly is only like 2 in the North Country, really. Right. And so they can only do so much. And so then we're trying to work with people who build homes on their own and home builders, and trying to compete with, you know, a pricier market sometimes. It's like, you really have to kind of figure out how you're going to use the housing that's there and make it a place where people can want to be. And at the same time, how do you keep sort of building new housing? But if we always just wait for the building new housing, it's going to be a really, really slow road, you know?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, people like you, people like me are in these challenges every day, right? So it's like, if it's a 20-year payback on this thing, that's not really helping us. So the hope of like my project, like where planning reports go in general, where this one hopes to go is, it hopes to go towards policy change, right? It hopes to go towards figuring out not only what's hard for the people who are looking for housing, but what's working for the people who are providing housing and trying to get rentals occupied. Like what's working for them? What are the neat sort of like promising things that we could try and do in more places? And then also like, what's not working, right? And how do we match those up better, right? Like if we talk about these things, and you've probably heard about them before, but like these like intentional community things, right? Where a cluster of cottages are all built together, or a bunch of tiny homes are put in a space, and we don't, as like towns, require them to be built like a home on a lot with its own standalone thing, and only one home on one lot, and the sort of rules that like tend to be tied to building housing. Like how do we start to create spaces, like you're saying, for people to build community, but in a way that has some like affordability to it, right? Like, wouldn't it be cool to think you could maybe fit like 12 or 15 little cottages together with like a community space where people can go to their private places, but also come together right there in their day-to-day lives, right? And what has to be different for that to start showing up more is like really what the goal is at the end of the day. And the project is helping figure out what we need to change and what we need to support to get there. And that's slow and it's long.
Well, that's actually something that I'm quite interested in, is like how kind of on like a on what like level of, I guess, like government or like local government, whatever, how it affects housing, and almost also like why it's even possible for landlords to raise the rent this much. Like I've heard of things like rent control and stuff like that, and I know there's like mixed um kind of conclusions about whether that is good for places or really bad for places. But what how does the kind of the government locally, at a state level, whatever, how does that affect housing?
Yeah. I'll tell you two things. I'm going to tell you that and this is all sort of in my opinion, and I think you'll probably, if you talk to 4 other planners like me, you probably have 4 different opinions on it. It's not a sort of like cut and dry science. It's a little bit softer than that, but I will tell you, I think the most impactful unit of government on housing is local government. It's your town hall.
Okay.
Because in the world we live in today, land use decisions are made by towns.
Mm-hmm.
The state puts forward policies and programs and has their set of like statutes, right? Has the state laws that enable towns to decide what can get built where. And sometimes when something is really not working right, the state will come in and introduce like a law at the state level that says you must be doing something a little different, right? Sometimes the state will say this is a big enough problem that it can't just be solved individually by each town. It's something that we have to like push as a whole. And in New Hampshire, they've done that in a couple of ways already. They have a law specifically, and this is like super specific, about accessory dwelling units on properties. And what the heck is an accessory dwelling unit?
Right.
It's like it's the granny apartment, right? It's the like 1-bedroom apartment in the back. It's turning your basement into an apartment for somebody else. It's taking a space above a garage and turning it into an apartment to rent at your home.
Yeah.
Like if you think about any time you've ever seen somebody who has like multi-generational living, and like maybe grandma has part of the house and it happens to have a little kitchen space in it too. So like she can do her own thing and you can do your own thing, but you can also all get together.
Mm-hmm.
So like New Hampshire came in a handful of years ago and said, you must allow accessory dwelling units on people's single family homes. You can't say no to it, because until then, a lot of the towns had said no to that. They'd said, every property should have 1 single family home on it.
Okay.
Right? Each lot should have 1 house, should be 1 household in it. And the state said, you know what? That's really not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have housing that's not just large homes. We need more of these smaller units. We need more places for people to be. Mm-hmm. And they push this like accessory dwelling unit thing. They've also done it on workforce housing, which is to say like each town has to have an area where you're going to allow people to build workforce housing being housing that's generally affordable to people who work in that community and in the area. It's like about income levels. But when it comes to the day-to-days of it, mm-hmm. It's every town on their own is making their own decisions about it.
Yeah.
And to be frank with you, very few of the towns are well equipped to make those decisions.
Okay.
Because they're small towns, right?
Right.
They're not like, I mean, I was going to say like Bethlehem doesn't have one. Littleton doesn't have one. There's not a planner, right? There's not somebody whose job it is to do that sort of following the bigger picture of what's happening with building, what's happening with jobs, what's happening with your people, and figuring out how you change your rules to help it happen differently.
Right.
It tends to be people who are volunteers and they sit on their planning board, right?
Yeah.
And their planning board, at the end of the day, the planning board is responsible for those ordinances. They're responsible for coming up with the new policies that say things like, you know what? If you want to build a cottage community and they're all going to be little places and you're going to have a pavilion or like a communal kitchen or gathering house in the center, we're going to let you do that. That's going to work, and we're going to let it be a reasonable amount of land you need to have it and whatnot. It takes a lot to get people okay with that sort of change, because change makes people nervous.
Right.
And so,
well, I guess also if it's volunteer based, like you kind of get the people working on it who decide they want to work on it. It might not be, people with certain degrees or experience or whatever.
yeah, and to be honest with you, and it might be people, sometimes it is, I mean, there's good and bad on this, right? But like sometimes it's people who just don't have their ear to the issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, if they, in their circles, if their housing situation is very stable, they work somewhere where everybody else's housing situations are pretty stable, their kids go to school and all of the other parents seem to have pretty stable housing situations, they might not see the issue. Right. Yeah. And so they're at a disadvantage to try and really make meaningful change to it. So that's sort of why we do this work, to try and collect all of these stories so that we can go out to those planning boards, we can go out to those places and say, this is really what it means in your community, and how can we start tackling that, right? Like how do you guys tackle that in Bethlehem? How do you tackle it in Lisbon? It's going to be different, right? Because that's the way it goes.
Is that the work you're doing then, to like in compiling this study to then go to these like smaller planning committees and giving them that information? And are you planning on also trying to work with them to create solutions, or just providing that information to them?
Yeah, I think my hope, well, and it's a moving target, but my hope is that we can get to a place where we can talk about the best practices, talk about what's worked well where, right? If Lancaster has a really cool solution they've figured out and it would help Bethlehem to know about it, I want Bethlehem and Lancaster and me to all sit down and talk about how that could or couldn't work, right? And vice versa, right? If like Lisbon's got a huge problem and they don't know how to tackle it, but like Conway just might, we want that connection too, right? We want to know what's going south and what's going well. But so it's a little bit of all of it, right? It's having the report at the end of the day. It's having the report that we can bring to the state legislature and tell them, if we need the rules to change at the bigger picture, how do they have to change? And then it's taking it to not just even the planning boards for change, but taking it to community groups, because that's who really advocates for change in your community, right? Like I can show up at every select board meeting and talk until I'm blue in the face about an issue, but you might not want to listen to me. Let's get real, right? Like you might be like, okay, so here's this Kaela, she showed up again, she tells us she thinks we should do X, Y, and Z, and then let's be frank, she goes back to her office in Littleton and we don't see her for 6 weeks, right? But like, if there's 5 or 6 people in that community who really care about the issue and they're going to go to those planning board meetings when I can't be at all of them, they're going to listen to those people more because they're part of the community, right? And so it's a little bit of it all, but the hope is to have some practices to share, some ways to talk about the problem so that we're highlighting it for those communities who don't have their ear to it yet. And that we're sharing what's working well and what's not working really well in other places, right? Jackson, New Hampshire is doing this and trying to get a really cool program about home sharing going on, where people with larger homes just can rent rooms, and that there's some sort of a matchmaker system. to
Yeah.
be like, hey, I'm so and so looking for housing. Hey, I'm this person. I have a 5-bedroom home and it's just me and my husband in it. Assuming we can build the trust and respect and it feels like a good setup, we'd
Right.
let you come and live here with us.
Right.
And we'd help you get settled in the community. We'd help you know who's kicking around, who does what,
Right.
how to be
Well, and I
involved.
really like that, those kind of solutions where they're almost more humanistic and collaborative than the kind of you know proliferation of like single bedroom studio apartments where you're just kind of like paying someone and you don't even have a relationship with them and like you're just living on your own. I
Yeah,
think
right. It goes back to what you were saying about like paying $700 to like live alone isn't the full picture of what I'm trying to get out of my housing.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I'm going to be respectful of your time because I know that you're like at work and stuff, and I imagine you're a busy lady. So here's 2 things I'm going to make shameless plugs for you. One, I if it's okay with you, I want to use some of the information we talked about today to be one of those stories. I do not need to tie your name to it if you don't want me to, but if you want me to, I can. But I will take some of the pieces about like what it is to be a young person trying to get settled in the region and talk about what it is that you as one of those examples of people might be looking for.
cool.
And if
Yeah,
it's okay with you,
perfect.
I'd love to use some of this because this has been a great conversation for me.
Yeah, of course. And you're welcome to use my name or not. Like it's up to you. I don't mind.
And then the other thing, because I can't help a shameless plug if I can put one in anywhere, is I have a committee I'm trying to put together. And a committee is an annoying responsibility. I understand that because it's not a one-time thing and it's easy to commit to like a one-time thing. So, but I have this committee I'm trying to pull together where I want to have different angles on the issue so that I can pull together a group of people 4, 5 times over the next 6 months to say, this is where I'm going in my work right now. This is how I'm trying to do my focus groups. This is how we're doing the survey. What am I missing? Who should I be talking to? What does this look like to you? Am I going down a totally like crazy alley, right? Am I going down this alley where people start pushing a bunch of 1-bedroom apartments all in isolation and you want to say, hold on, you're missing the mark a bit here. And you don't have to answer me today. Take your time and think about it. I would love to invite you to be part of that committee. We're going to meet on Zoom. It is a cool and strange mix of people. I will tell you, it is definitely like probably an odder group than you sit down with most of the time. They're from all sorts of different places. And some of them are people who just build like for-profit construction companies who build houses. And some of them are like people who work in senior services and are trying to figure out how to keep like older adults in the Mount Washington Valley with like good housing. Like it's a total like smorgasbord of people, but that's kind of the point. And so if you're, think about it, if you're interested, shoot me back an email, let me know. If you're not, I am at least going to try and get you to maybe spend another 2-hour section of time with me because I want to do a focus group with young people in the region who are trying to figure out how you settle here. And it'd be similar to this conversation, but it wouldn't just be me and you. It would be me, you, and probably 5 other people like us.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. I'd want to, I mean, in terms of like time commitment for the first one, how much like is it just once a week and
No, it's like probably once a month.
okay.
And it's probably like a 2-hour meeting once a month.
Okay.
And the timing of it, we're adjusting on. To be honest with you, if everybody can come together on a Saturday morning, then that's when we're going to come together. But so, it's not I would tell you it's not a commitment that I'd like people who sign up to have the intention that they think they would try and make it to most of them. but it's not like something where if you're not at it, you're going to get on some like bad kids list with me. You
Okay.
know, like we all have a lot going on.
Right.
But the point of it is to keep me honest. It's to keep me moving in the directions that seem the most meaningful to the people who are actually in this issue.
Cool. Yeah, well, that's definitely something I'm interested in. And I'll want to, sit and think about it, just see if I can piece it together and everything else I'm doing. But I'll definitely shoot you an email and let you know.
Okay. And then when I pull together the focus group for young people, I'll send you to the list when we're trying to get it scheduled, and you can let us know when you're available. And if you can join us, I would be super psyched.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. Well, hey, Emma, thank you so much for like all of your time. Is there anything else you want to ask of me, or?
The only thing is just to let me know if your boss says it's okay for me to use the recording.
Yeah.
I kind of want to put it on that Facebook group that I made about like why is rent rising in Littleton. And then, like I said, some of my friends and I are also trying to put together a like live stream art health kind of like thing for the winter. So I think it would be cool to do a segment on rent.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be cool too. So yeah, let me see about that, but I'll get you an answer. If not today, I'll get you an answer tomorrow on it. I won't leave you hanging for long.
Cool. All right. Well,
all right.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So good luck. We'll still stay in touch because I'll hound you to be on things, and you'll hound me to let me get back to you. And cool. So we'll stay in touch. But in the meantime, have like a good day.
You as well.
All right. Bye.
Bye.